what we see around us, we don't believe that because we want to buy into standards.
We have to prove that we're good fathers. When, as far as the mothers, it's just assumed.
So I'll wait on the check. I'll keep my self-respect first.
I'm a black man trying to save a black man, and I noticed as I looked around the whole room, there's no one helping me.
The reality is, if it affects you, it affects me.
Welcome to Like It Is Online. I am your host, Eunice Smith-Clark. It has been almost a year since COVID has forced the entire world to shut down. A year. But with unpaid bills, millions still out of work, empty cupboards, rising death and infection rates, for those infected the hardest, there are still many more questions that have been unanswered. Today, along with Dr. Sara Corse, therapist at Council for Relationships, Melody Kiem, Executive Director for the Coalition Against Hunger, and Connie Grier, Professor and founder of the Respect Alliance, Like It Is attempts to address some of your most pressing issues. Viewers are welcome to chat along with the panel. Let's start tonight's show with Melody. Melody, according to the US Census, COVID-19 may lead to a hunger pandemic. How many people are on the verge of starvation because of this pandemic?
That's a great question. In Philadelphia, we're making some great strides towards actually addressing hunger and making a difference in 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit. So at this point, what we're hearing is that in Philadelphia, we've seen about a 30% increase in the number of people experiencing food insecurity. And across the nation, it's 1 in 7 people. And when we dig down and we look at communities of color, Black communities, Latino communities, it's more like 1 in 5. And we don't see this, we see this probably increasing before it changes at all. So once we are at a place where the health piece of COVID, we get a handle on that, we still have the economic crisis. Which has been a result of COVID.
Right.
And that is not something that's going to be addressed quickly or easily. So we really do have to really take this seriously. And of course, hunger is preventable. So hunger is a symptom of many other things. It's a symptom of poverty. It's a symptom of racism. It's a symptom of people not having what I would call thriving wage jobs. And so we've really got to think about how do we address those issues moving forward?
The homelessness rate has severely increased, since this pandemic. And, just on another note of things, we know that that's going to lead to foreclosure rate increasing even, at some point this year. What do you think are the most challenging issues that people deal with when it comes to needing help? Do you think they deal with a lot of embarrassment, particularly with wanting to get food assistance or even going to the shelters?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in our country, we have, made it something to be ashamed of. And so that's certainly a component of what people are dealing with. And, particularly with COVID, we're seeing, folks who have been dealing with this prior to COVID, it's even harder for them. This just adds another layer for them. But we also see a lot of folks who have not had to deal with this before. And so for them, it's trying to figure out, what are my possibilities? What do I do? How do I access the things I need? The other thing that's been challenging is that the landscape of what's available keeps changing. So when this hit and they rolled out the first wave of COVID relief, it's one thing for Congress to approve a bill, but it's another thing for those things to be implemented on both the state and a local level. And there's also often a disconnect between folks who are making decisions and the realities of people who are trying to access those services. If it's SNAP, the food stamp program, if it's folks who are trying to go and access one of the food distribution sites. There's just a lot of challenges that people experience along the way. So yeah, it's just, I think it's just been what is already a really challenging and hard issue is just been made even harder. And there have been some bright lights, some great things have been added in the last round of COVID relief. We did see a 15% increase in SNAP benefits, which is something that we have been really, really pushing for, along with local, state, and federal partners. And so we're starting to see that roll out this month, but that will only continue until the end of June. And we would, of course, like to see that be a long-term increase.
Thank you. Excellent. Connie, my next question is for you. It's been reported that some kids only get full nutritious meals when they go to school. So food being accommodated to them during remote learning, what's being done about that?
So several schools in the district have become takeaway centers where students or families can report to the school location to pick up lunch, breakfast and lunch for several days at a clip. So that was done in order to, provide for students who depend on the free or reduced lunch that they would normally receive from school.
How is the remote learning, how is it affecting children being able to follow the school curriculum?
You see some students who, although we're in the midst of the pandemic and, totally online, they are doing well. However, you have certain students who, because of things like depression, loneliness, their social, emotional impact from the pandemic, family members being sick with COVID or other things, multiple children being in the same space at the same time, having to learn and receiving assistance, sometimes from a parent who they themselves may not be able to either understand the curriculum or, that's not their job. They haven't studied education. So to expect them to be on top of their game educationally is a leap. So in terms of the answer to your question, how are students dealing with it? It's a spectrum. Some students are, doing okay, but many students are not.
Another thing, and this goes back to the discussion we were just having about the food shortages. There's a lot of students who they're trying to figure it out right now with even being in shelters. And I know that, where I am in New York, I forget the number of the statistics, but they just released it not even a month ago, that there are a lot of shelters who don't have Wi-Fi, capability. So it hinders the children from being able to, to perform and, and be included in the remote learning, on top of dealing with the emotional, and mental aspect of it. So how do you guys handle that?
So two things. In some instances, and this is not for every student, but in some instances, students have received hotspots when their families indicated that they did not have Wi-Fi service. Also, I don't know if you were aware, but the district made sure that the students have Chromebooks. So they're not being asked to provide the technology or the hardware to get online for classes. The district has provided Chromebooks, and they also, provide the opportunity for families to swap out the Chromebooks if something goes wrong, if a short in the wire, screen cracks, whatever. There's opportunity for the family to switch out the Chromebook. Now, in terms of families that don't have Wi-Fi, and if they ask and the hotspot was unavailable, accommodations, I'll say, should be made. I can speak to my experience with that. In my position, in my school, we make accommodations. hopefully that is what the deal is in other schools as well. So just like in brick and mortar, if you're absent from school, if you have a note that provides the reason for your absence, and in this pandemic, the reasons are greater. It could be, I have a family member with COVID and I'm helping to take care of that family member. So yes, that absence would be excused. Just as if you had a note that said you personally were sick, your absence would be excused. So yes, there are accommodations that can be made. And when your absences are excused, that excuses your work too, and you have time to make up your work.
Okay. Sarah, we need you. We need you in this conversation. Sarah, how are people coping, and how are therapists like you able to come in and try to help the children, just the families in general, because there's so much that we all have gone through within this last 10, 11 months. Some children alone have lost their parents due to COVID. And so now they bear that burden of trying to figure out how to grieve as a young person.
I think what's happened is that because we're in a situation where almost everyone is tapped out, right? So in a household, everyone can be tapped out. And also there's this kind of changing of the goalposts, like when is this going to be over? We think, the early sense that this is going to be over soon, then you kind of muster up some extra energy to get through. And then suddenly it's like it's extended, such that, counting on an endpoint becomes part of the stressor, right? And so we're sort of like, how do you not go to hopelessness? How do you continue to find energy? And I think there's a couple of things that are pretty important. One is that we human beings are pretty resilient. You can reach the end of a day and feel like you can do no more. And frankly, some sleep,
indeed.
Right? Some sleep, for those of us in this room, probably some coffee, and you're up at it the next day. So in some ways, we kind of have some amazing stores of energy and resilience that kind of regenerate. But what happens if in a family system, those stores are just depleted, right? And so when I think about like, what is the value of therapy? A lot of people are sort of like, I don't need to go see a therapist. I'm okay. I can get through this myself. That means you're weak or that you're crazy or something like that. But really, therapy is a space where people can like open up about their vulnerability, get a little space to process some things through. And often that meeting, and right now we're doing all of our therapy through Zoom, video, or telephone. So one of the things that's advantageous is that people can do that in the middle of their lives, right? If you can find a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour to get on the phone with a therapist, you don't have to drive somewhere, organize for childcare. You can bring family members in. So in that way, that's sort of a benefit. But people often aren't quite sure how that can help. And my experience is that being able to kind of open it up and unload it with someone you don't have to worry about, right? My clients don't have to worry about taking care of me. I'm taking care of myself. I can hear what they're going through. I can feel it with them, but it's not mine. So I'm not taking it home. I'm not taking it on. I'm not taking it home. And often when we think about opening up to somebody else, part of us is saying, I don't want to burden anybody with this.
So with everything that has occurred, what impact is social distancing and isolation having on a human psyche? And if you could also even express, how is it affecting the child's ability to focus with remote learning?
I actually think a lot of people have found some ways to connect. The question is, can you continue to be creative about bridging those distances? So let's take the vast middle of people who still do wake up in the morning with some energy. Maybe they've got some new ideas. Maybe someone reaches out to them. So there's enough going on in their world that what they need is to be able to say yes to an initiative or to reach out to someone else to allow it to happen. But then there's an extreme of people who really are just totally isolated.
Right.
And there can be this kind of shutdown thing that goes on where you're depressed, lonely, isolated, don't want to be a burden, a bother, you can't figure any way through. And to whatever degree this message can reach that person, an encouragement to reach out for help. And if it can meet, if this message can meet the people in the middle who still have some resources, notice who in your community might be like that. Notice if you have neighbors who you haven't seen coming out. You wonder if there's lights on. I was listening to a podcast some time ago, and this person was saying, when I was growing up, if we didn't smell food coming out of the neighbor's house, we would take dinner. So if we pay more attention, we pay more attention to others in our community. And it takes a little bit of, okay, I'm going to muster up a little more energy than maybe I started out having to notice and to breach that barrier that I might have of, oh, I don't want to embarrass somebody or be intrusive. Say, okay, worst thing is I knock on your door and I say, I brought you something, or can we chat? Mask on, keep a distance, right? We can reach out.
I think that one thing that schools can do, as schools are like community hubs, and I'm sure, many schools are doing this, but to answer your question, the more normalcy that the school offers the young person, and when I say normalcy, I don't just mean instructional normalcy, I mean clubs, activities. Although these things have shifted to be online, they could still work. Once you get past the acknowledgement of, hey, this is virtual, this is going to look different than what it looks like in brick and mortar, you still have a group of children who are interested in that idea. So if it was a poetry club, or if it was this after school foreign language club, or, whichever clubs were running in your brick and mortar, you can still have those things. It's just all virtual. It will look different, but it will still provide a social outlet where students can interact with one another, and an outlet that is non-instructional, so that they are spending time socially and stimulating their brain without it having to count in terms of like a grade.
I want to bounce back over to Melody for a minute as we talk about the food shortages. Melody, is there a certain limit on people who are able to utilize the food bank per week, per month? Are they able to daily? How does that work? And then if you could also tell us how donations can be made to support the food bank. I know that recently I've seen just through the media, people taking it upon themselves to set up space like on their front lawn and, in the communities where people could drop off food and then they can also pick it up. Sadly, though, there has been some of those stations vandalized. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's been more community outreach and togetherness and supplying food and even just household supplies for people. So could you just tell us how the distribution can be, and then what the limit is on the food banks?
Sure. So it's going to really depend because there are a lot of different food pantries and soup kitchens, and now we also have the community fridges, which is one of the new things that I'm really gives me a lot of hope. I'm really excited to see. And so they really all have their own ways of operating.
Is the community fridge, is that the refrigerator where people can come like drop off and like just like kind of outside right on the street?
Yeah. And there are about, there are, I think it's almost 20 of those now across Philadelphia. And You know, that gives me a lot of hope, because it's not only about, it's about people sharing in their neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So if you have extra, you bring something. If you need something, you take something. And so I think that, you know, for me, when I think about food, there are two pieces of it. There's the piece where people need the food. You know, they need to have something to eat to feed their families and themselves. There's also that hope of feeling connected, feeling seen, feeling heard, particularly during this time. And so, you know, I think the community fridge idea really helps bring a community together and give you that sense of connection, which I think a lot of people are really, you know, wanting and needing. So, you know, so that's one kind of model, but there are a lot of different ways that food is being distributed. You know, we work with a lot of food pantries and soup kitchens that are run by local volunteers. Like, this is their life's work. They've been doing it. They're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, or even some in their 90s. And so this has been a really hard time for them, because many of them are in that really vulnerable age themselves. And they have to think about themselves. They have to think about their volunteers, and also, you know, the folks coming to pick up the food. And how can you do this safely? Many of them operate out of their churches, their synagogues, their mosques, and those were closed. And so, you know, each pantry, each food distribution site has really had to figure out for themselves what they can do safely, how they can work, you know, what are the food resources they have available. And that's, you know, going to vary based on donations. It's going to vary based on, you know, their connections and support from their community. So I wish there was like this blanket statement of, yes, this is, you know, how much food you can get, and, you know, this is how it works. But it's, you know, one of the things I love about Philly is how neighborhood centric we are. And that is a huge strength. But that also means that, you know, every community is going to do something a little bit different, because they're going to do what works for them. And that's kind of what we see in the food distribution ways that it's done in each community. And in terms of support, you know, again, that's going to vary. If they're part of a faith community or church, often the church and the faith community will support them. They will often get food from, you know, some of the bigger food pantries share Full Abundance.
Right.
We don't distribute food or store food, but we help connect them with food. So
Got
we do
it.
a little bit of that.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So it's not like a drop-off center where, you know, people can just come. Okay.
Yeah. So we do a lot of support. So one of the other things we've been doing is wellness calls with the food pantry folks, because, you know, it's been hard for them. So that gives them a chance to talk with each other. What are you doing? How are you dealing with this? Making sure that we're, you know, keeping safe and supporting them in their decisions that they make.
But is there abundance of food that is available, or is there like a list? And, you know, the people have to go on that list, and it's like, oh, we'll call you when you know, when it comes up, when,
yeah, it's, you know, most of them, you know, they have had to really think about how often they can be open. You know, they don't want people standing at their door and not being able to give them something. So they work really hard to make sure that they have enough food. One of the things that we heard is that they sometimes run out of food, and this was even before COVID. So we have a food rescue program that helps connect them with some additional food resources. So again, you know, one of the things COVID does is push us all to be creative and to really think outside the box and say, you know, what do we need? How can we get it? What are some new partners and ways that we can do that? We have a race against hunger that we do every year, and that's coming up in April. And we use it, of course, to raise dollars for us and our work at the coalition, but we also use it as a platform so that food pantries and soup kitchens can raise dollars to support their programs. So that's one of the things that we do to help support them and help them raise dollars.
Sara, what would you recommend, you know, for self-care, for, you know, just for families, for adults, for children in general? You know, and to help prevent from burnout?
While Melody was talking, I was thinking about how hard it is to get the connectors amongst all the different things. How do you connect the person who can help with the person who needs? Your work to sort of check in and make sure that if you have an emergency supply delivered to a food pantry, or checking in wellness checks on people who are doing that giving, it made me think of sort of like this tier of helpers, and how those of us who are carrying a big burden of care do need to take care of ourselves.
Right.
And that could be someone like me, a therapist, or it could be a caregiver in a family, right? So I think and also there's certain of us who have found ourselves into this field because we're natural caregivers. We tend to do that. We open ourselves to other people, and a lot of people exist that way who've never become therapists. So they may miss the signs that they actually need some downtime, some restoration for themselves, maybe even so self-care. Some of it is about the things that you think about, like bubble bath or meditation or doing some yoga or taking a walk. That is definitely like gets at that core level of, can I put a little bit of something into every day where I'm unwinding, I'm separating from the things that are mostly worrying me or what I'm holding. That's about healthy lifestyle across the board. Self-care might also be about really being honest with yourself. Are there some things that I'm doing in the guise of self-care that are not super healthy? And I know it. I don't need somebody else to tell me that that's not healthy. But if someone says, hey, is there anything you're doing that's not so healthy, and can we work together to reduce that and insert some healthy coping strategies? People would say, yeah, I know what I need to do. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm not eating well. I'm drinking too much. I'm allowing myself. Those are the top. And those restore us. Sleep, healthy food, not numbing out with alcohol, but sleeping instead, calming in a different way. And then interaction. I mean, I think even the most introverted people benefit from conversation. We are relational people. We benefit from that. And then there's this question of, okay, so does self-care mean therapy? Take your husband in the grief counseling. You could say grief is a normal response to a normal human event. We all die, we all lose people. So everyone experiences loss and everyone experiences grief. We don't like to talk about it. And we often feel like, okay, we've got some kind of inner timetable in our mind. I'm over it because it's been X amount of time. Or for me, when I've lost people in my life, because I kind of, at that stage of my life, tended to push my emotions away and use my intellect, I'd read a book. I'm going to read a book about grief, and that means I'm grieving. Well, I learned that wasn't really the first time I went to a therapist, and they said, you say you're coming here because you want to learn what it's like to be in therapy, so because you're going to be a therapist, but you seem kind of sad. And I burst into tears, or tried not to. So we've got our different ways of coping that might really be looking like pushing it away. And we might push it away because we don't know what it's supposed to look like.
Right.
We might push it away because we feel like if I start crying, I'll never stop. Just on that, I don't know if this is scientifically accurate, but I remember reading somewhere that the average good cry lasts 7 minutes. So I think we could all handle that. I don't know what the range is, right? We don't need to get into the statistics of it, but we sort of get scared that if we start letting our emotions out, we'll never be able to put them back in.
One thing that I have personally found is journaling. You know, it helps me when I feel so overwhelmed and just full of anxiety. You know, I say to myself, all right, Eunice, you have to release this, you know, some way. And then once I sit down and I actually just start writing what I'm feeling today. Like you said, being honest with self. And when I write what I'm feeling and what emotion I'm going through, it's just it's a weight, just putting that on paper and then thinking, actually processing it. Like, why am I feeling this? And I'm writing it, because this happened.
Yeah.
And because we sometimes we let things just pile up, it could be things that people have said to us and we didn't respond back the way, whatever it is. And, that, and then in coloring, sometimes at night and even in the morning, I'll sit down and sit in bed and then I color. And next thing I know, my mind is somewhere else and I'm now, down under the covers. I'm ready to go to sleep because my mind has now escaped from all of those problems that, that weigh me down to keep me from falling asleep.
That's great. That actually makes me want to ask everybody here, what's your thing?
Yoga.
Okay.
Yoga.
Yoga, yes.
Beautiful.
I am a recent convert to yoga. I've tried several other times in my life. For some reason, I tried this time and it stuck. I gave myself over to not being perfect in it and experiencing the 8 limbs of yoga that have only one limb of yoga is about what happens on the mat. There are seven other limbs that are all about your mental and your emotional state. So really, truly embracing yoga as a practice, as opposed to an exercise, has really done wonders for me. And now it's like I do yoga every day. I started with 10 minutes a day. I have not done a session that has been longer than 30 minutes, but that doesn't matter. It's about taking that time for yourself, to be intimate with yourself, to breathe and be in the moment, to have your mind on the moment, not on the bills, not on the pandemic, not on your children, just on you, and the beauty and the strength that you feel from even attempting the asana poses, not getting them perfectly correct, but the attempt. You'll feel yourself. I get emotional just talking about it. I try to convert as many people to true yoga as possible, not perfect, going to Birkham yoga with your, cute outfit on and, sweating it out for the public. Yoga can also be a private good thing.
So with that said, my next question is twofold. How do we incorporate those self-care practices into the remote aspect of learning for our children? And then the other side of that, there's going to be many of people, as we talk about through, the hunger and starvation and even homeless, those who are among the less privileged and maybe not even have a home. There are going to be some that say, I'm not in a position to put aside the cares of my day. I don't have a job. I don't have a car. I've lost everything. I've lost my children. I've lost my parents to COVID. I watched so many people die. I don't have it. How am I supposed to relax to do yoga or to practice any form of, meditation? Or what would you recommend to those people?
So I'll answer both of those questions. They're kind of two distinct, separate questions. In terms of someone saying that they're not ready, they may not be ready, and that's okay. It's not to be like, you can't force someone to be in a space, but I think once you have the conversation, I'll say this from experience. I've had conversations with people who said, yoga's not for me. I can't do yoga. I can't do it. Once I impress upon them the fact that it's not about perfection and about 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not talking about traveling to a studio or even in your own home, taking an hour away from your life. I'm saying there are sessions that are 5 minutes long. I think we all have 5 or 10 minutes. It's not about the 5 or 10 minutes. It's about if you are ready to spend the time intentionally doing something good for yourself. It's not about we don't have time. That's the problem. We have time for everyone else and everything else. And the jobs that will replace you tomorrow if you drop dead, they're not holding that position. If you drop dead, they are going to replace you. We make time for that job, the job that we know that will replace us overnight. But we won't take 5 or 10 minutes for ourselves. That's not about not having time. That's about, are you mentally ready to do good for yourself? And everybody is not ready. And that's okay. They have to be ready. So I think if yoga was introduced as, like I'm saying, it's not about having fancy items. It's not about having the best mat. It's, not about being able to afford yoga, private yoga. You could go on YouTube for free. There are thousands upon thousands of yoga videos.
But there's still some people who don't have the accessibility to YouTube. They don't even have a cell phone. They don't, so what do we suggest to those people who need to find a way to relax their mind through all of these troubles? Because there's a lot of people who are in a much worse position than we are. They're not able to afford the benefit of sitting on Zoom. You don't
need YouTube for meditation. You don't need YouTube.
Right.
You don't need.
Here's what I'm saying. These people are weighed down. They're weighed down with a lot.
I'm agreeing with you. And what I'm saying is there are people that are in stages that may not be ready. That's just like people going to therapy. If they're not ready to receive what therapy has to offer, they're not going to receive what therapy has to offer. So it may take them even going a few times, resisting, but going until they open up to what they could, to the benefit of therapy. I think that's the same thing for meditation. I think it's the same thing for yoga. Sometimes you have to do it even when you don't feel like it.
I agree.
And I think I would jump in.
Take 5 minutes to give to yourself. You might not think that you deserve to take the 5 minutes. You might not think that you have the 5 minutes, but I think taking 5 minutes as a practice, ultimately you'll get to a place where you think that 5 minutes was a good 5 minutes well spent. And I'll pass it to Sarah, then I'll come back and answer the school question. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really inspiring, Connie. And I think where I go with that is to 2 or 3 thoughts came to mind.
Okay.
It's lowering it, like it's reaching the space where it feels like you can give a yes. I had this conversation with my daughter who teaches Pilates, and I was trying to get back into a yoga practice and complaining that I would never do it every day. And she says, well, how much do you think is a good thing to do? And I said, well, at least 10 minutes. And she says, try 2, right? It's hard to only do 2, right? If you do the 2, you're probably going to do 5. But anyway, it's sort of like figuring out, well, if that's not accessible to you, let's find what is. If yoga doesn't feel right to you, tell me what you liked to do before. What did you like to do? Can you take a walk? When you access your playful self, is there anything that you used to like to do that used to make you feel? So in some ways, it's sort of one thing that happens with experiencing homelessness or great loss of things is that you lose a sense of your identity, and but you can invite the person to reconnect with that. Let's reconnect you with what you used to love. What makes you laugh when your kids do it? Can you try it with them? Do it with them? There's some joyful moments that we let pass. So in a little bit, it's just kind of in partnership saying, let's try to connect together with those joyful moments and just build them a little bit. Let's go from 2 minutes to 3. Let's laugh twice.
I think the other thing that has really struck me is particularly back in the spring, we have a SNAP hotline and people call, and people were they were so anxious and they had so many questions. And what seemed to really help was to have somebody take the time to really listen to them and to say, how are you doing? And to honestly want to know what the answer, to that question was. And, even though, that's not our role, we're not doing therapy, just that in some ways simple conversation, finding somebody to talk to, even if it's a very, not a deep conversation, sometimes can really help. And I think we've all on our team been just struck how important that is, that human connection, finding those ways to do that in this time that we have so many limitations. So, I think about it like I'm always happy when I go to the grocery store because it's like I can get out of the house and talk to somebody and see something. Or walk down the street, you're taking a walk and, I feel like if I see somebody, I want to say hello. Again, not a deep conversation, but all those things do make a difference.
Just appreciating the simple things of life now at this point, right?
Right.
Yeah, just to say hello to someone and be able to hear them reciprocate that and respond back. There are tons of people, particularly seniors, who live in fear daily. They have not going out of the house. They have not left their home, unless it's maybe for a doctor's appointment, but they have so much anxiety of leaving, in fear of that if they step out their front door, they're going to catch COVID. So is there a drop-off service of any, okay. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So we work with a couple different partners, and, if we know that it's somebody who can't leave the home for whatever reason, we do not get off the phone with them until we ensure that they're going to get some food delivered to them to their door. So, we have kind of their needs are, we'll make that connection for them. And usually what we'll do is, we'll do that. We'll help them apply for SNAP so they get their SNAP benefits, but that doesn't come right away. And then, we'll follow up with them and say, did you receive, the food, and, check in, make sure they got their SNAP benefits as well. But that has always been a really important resource. But with COVID, as you said, there are a lot of people who, understandably, don't want to leave their home and need food, need services. So yeah, that's been a really important focus of connecting with partners who can do that.
Excellent, phenomenal. So many of us have lost loved ones that we have not been able to touch, able to see once they were admitted to the hospital. We weren't able to have a proper burial, for our loved ones. So with that, there's some sort of like an empty, incomplete feeling, not been able to say that final goodbye or whatever, however you want to refer to it. What suggestion would you give to help those people who are struggling with that?
Yeah, first of all, it's hard, it's heartbreaking. And often you can feel like I've just been cheated of all of that. So the question is, what is it that you can do to somewhat gain back for yourself what you feel you've been cheated of? So in some ways, it's like, what do we ever do with unfinished business? Because even under the best of circumstances, we may lose someone before we've had a chance to say goodbye. We may be somewhere where we can't return to attend the funeral. And even if those rituals, even if those connections are made, there may be something for you that in your grieving you haven't had a chance to achieve. And I think in some ways there's a few things that, even just putting yourself into the place of asking, what could be good enough? One of the things that comes to mind is making your own personal scrapbook about the person, right? So somehow creating for yourself something that carries and contains for you memories, pictures, objects, things. Even the act of constructing that whether it's from your own memory or it's reaching out to others in your family or the friends of that person to kind of rebuild something that you can hold. It's your own personal working through, plus you have something to share. Like if you've lost a mom and you want to share with your kids, this is what I want you to know about grandma. That's it. It's not the same, but it's, what can I do that's kind of good enough? And similarly, holding your own memorial service, like bringing together people in a setting like this, where you say, please gather with me. Here's a person I lost. I want to share about that person with you. Will you grieve with me? Will you be with me? Will you get to know this person? Maybe you didn't even know them, but let me share this person with you. Because I'm having a hard time letting go of that person. I don't want to. It feels unfinished. That takes some energy. It takes initiative to do either of those things, and we don't always have that energy or initiative. But I'm back to community.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say I'm back to community, because if sometimes if you can put out a request, you'll find someone who does have a little energy to help you with that.
Are there, in the Philadelphia region, are there any online support groups that may have been started, or just even nationally? Because now online can be national. Are there any support groups that you are aware of that's been started that we can put out there for people, who are in need?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know there's an organization called Peter's Place that works with grieving children. I'm pretty sure that there's a couple that work with grieving children. Peter's Place comes to mind. There's another one I would need to, I'd need to go find the information about, but that's one. I know
this is for grieving children who have lost parents under any circumstances, or is this particular to COVID? Just
under any circumstances.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any. I'm aware that there are. I will often get a request, and then I'll search and I'll say, okay, here's something. I haven't seen something that's specific to people who have lost someone to COVID and have not been able to be together and gather, but it's a really good idea.
Now, here's the thing though. Some people who are going through this, they feel guilt for whatever reason. They feel guilt, and with that guilt, sometimes we start to, which is a natural part of that that grieving and loss process. We start to kind of blame ourselves, or think, if only I could have, or how can we help to encourage those people to maybe find some relief? Would you say even some of the things that you already suggested, or any other ways?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that it is 100% normal under almost all circumstances. One of my specialties is grief counseling. And whenever I work with someone who's grieving, there's always a something like that. And we kind of give preference in our minds to certain kinds of feelings associated with grief. And we kind of ignore lots of other feelings that are part of grief. And so just knowing that it's normal to feel angry, it's normal if your irritation level is high. It's normal to feel guilt. It's normal to feel sad, hopeless. They're all part of normal grieving. And they don't usually enter all at once and stay all at once. They sort of take turns. And some of them, if you work through it, they'll sort of exit sooner. I think guilt is often associated with things that happen towards the end of the person's life that they wish they could, I should have taken that phone call. I should have shown up. I should have done this last thing. It's, and so just even being given permission to articulate that, sometimes that is enough for people to let it go. Sometimes people also benefit from taking an action to carry through the thing that they wish they had done, or even just to make a pact. I am going to reach out to someone else. I didn't reach out here, but I'm going to reach out there. And I'm going to do it on behalf of this person that I lost and I loved.
Connie, I want to get back to you, but I just want to put this on your mind, Sarah. I know that just me personally, in my process and journey of trying to find a therapist, it was very difficult. It took months. In fact, the only reason why I was able to connect with the therapist that I have my husband set up with is because it came from a personal relationship, you know, of someone who knew someone who was a therapist, called them, and you know, it just so happened that the therapist said, oh, well, contact the, you know, the center directly, and we do take your insurance. Because otherwise, my insurance company gave me a list of therapists in 2 states, the neighboring state, and no one returned my call. And from what I'm understanding, there's a waiting list, you know, everywhere you go, because so many people are seeking therapy at this point, just for day-to-day, you know, just to cope. They're really trying to survive. So if you could, before we wrap this up, just if you could, you know, if you have access to some information that you can share, you know, for people where they may be able to, you know, to get help in some way, okay, in the Philadelphia region.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, and I can talk, I'll just say briefly about
Sure.
Council for Relationships, my organization. We do not take insurance.
Okay.
But we do see people for on a sliding scale down to as little as $15 a session. So
Excellent.
sometimes people can be seen for less than an insurance copay, depending on their household income. And our particular organization specializes in working with couples and families, and often families are grieving together, couples are grieving together. Mm-hmm. And being able to work in a family systems or a relational way with people can help generate the support for each other and more understanding, because sometimes we might be grieving the same loss, we're grieving it in a different way. What we're feeling at any moment might be at odds with what someone else is feeling. So it can create some other family tensions. And so working as a family or as a couple with a therapist can really help with that. We also work with individuals, but that is one of our
but
specialties.
the thing is, the other spouse or other family members, they need help just to be able to help the, you know, the one that is severely impacted the most to cope, you know. Yeah. Whereas like in my household, you know, I need help just to keep my strength, to keep my husband up through, you know, through his pain, you know, as he's coping, because otherwise I'll crumble, you know? So, okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Connie, are you doing yoga?
No, not in the seat, no.
Okay, so I just wanted to bounce back over to you, because I know I asked the question about how are we incorporating any sort of relaxation and, you know, with the children, mindfulness, you know.
So again, I hate to always give this disclaimer. However, I want to be clear that I'm speaking from my experience and what I do with my staff and my students. We have at our school, we have staff advisories. So if you're familiar with the advisory concept, students would meet with their teachers for like 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, take roll, etc.
Like the homeroom.
Right, homeroom, yes, absolutely. Right. So we have staff homerooms. It's not to take roll, it's a check-in. How are you feeling? How are you feeling before you start the day with the students? Do you have any outstanding stressors from the day before? Any questions that I, as your administrator, can answer for you before you move on with your day? And oftentimes with my group that I meet with, we often do meditation practices, breathing exercise, where we will just put up a video and breathe to the guidance of the right. So we do that with the we meet with our staff every morning, and that's some of the things I do with my staff. With the students, We have community circles, especially with everything that has been transpiring in terms of social justice, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the election, the inauguration, storming of the Capitol, et cetera. These things don't happen in isolation in terms of our young people. People tend to feel that young people are not impacted by these things, but they are. They have tons of questions, they have tons of feelings. So we hold community circles where we bring the school together in groups of maybe 2 or 3 advisory groups with 2 or 3 adults, and we lead conversations where the students get an opportunity to respond to questions, but also ask their questions, share their opinions, share their thoughts. So that's one way that we think we are not only helping our students to become greater advocates for themselves, but we're allowing them to take some of the stress off of their minds because they're allowed to voice their concerns. In some advisories, teachers are doing kind of the same thing that I said that I do with the staff in terms of taking 5 minutes to, breathe, making sure that they have a 5 to 10 minute break inside of their instructional period where they say, okay, step away from the computer. I'm shutting down, 5 minutes, go stretch your legs, whatever, and come back. So teachers try to do what they can do to incorporate movement breaks, brain breaks inside of the instructional period.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. I really hope that it is, I hope that it's helping. And the reason why I say that is because it was brought to my attention that some schools, the way the remote online schooling should be, some schools are just packing too much in the day. And, it doesn't allow for the students to, they're overwhelmed. Some of them are sleeping, not that kids didn't sleep in school anyway on the desk, but no, but really they're overwhelmed. And that's because the focus online is different. We know for us, as grown people, our attention span is only so much that we can just sit in one space and just, it's a lot. The light, the glare, the blue light, it's a lot. All the information discussed can be found on the Like It Is Facebook page. You can watch previous episodes of Like It Is on the YouTube and Facebook page. The show also airs in Philadelphia County, Saturdays at 5 p.m. on Comcast channels 66 and 966, and Verizon channels 29 and 30. Again, from myself, I'd like to thank you all. Have a wonderful, fabulous night.